The Owl House is a show where almost every episode feels important, especially in season 2 and onwards. It seems like each episode serves a purpose and there isn't a single minute wasted. Since cancellation, the crew had so little minutes to spare. And that makes the one time where there was an exception stick out like a sore thumb. For the future, while having a lot of great moments, there were a lot of them, feels like an unnecessary episode, which isn't what you want for the penultimate episode of a show. We see things happen, but so many things could be cut without us caring or possibly even improving the episode. And today, on the 1-year anniversary of For the Future, I wanted to take a look back at this underwhelming episode and try to understand why it doesn't work, but also appreciate the moments that do. Starting For the Future, we had a lot of unknown variables. While going into thanks to them, we could guess a lot of what was going to happen, seeing as losing friends would be in a familiar environment. Going into this, we just know an all-powerful space child wants to play a game. And I appreciate how creative the whole collector plot was, especially compared to Amphibia Season 3, having a similar plot. The protagonist back on Earth, someone takes power, and there it's just like, oh, he's evil. Here, the collector reshaped the Boiling Isles and isn't just some evil leader exploiting the world like we've seen so many times. The aesthetic gives me Lewis Carroll vibes, like we fell down the rabbit hole and entered Wonderland. On the surface, it's bright and colorful, but there is something very off-putting about it, especially after 2 seasons in the Boiling Isles where that demon realm kind of became our home. The whole relationship with King and the Collector as well is just so well done. The relationship feels like the Collector looks up to King as an older brother, but King is distant, which causes more problems. I'm not blaming King for the state the Boiling Isles has become, but I think that the fear and him wanting to avoid confrontation with the Collector led to the Collector just making his game bigger and bigger and letting innocents get hurt. In Watching and Dreaming, we see how little a grasp the Collector has on mortality, and if King just explained it a bit to the Collector, so many things could have been solved, and it makes that dynamic so much more interesting to explore. And we must look at things from the Collector's perspective. Collectors live long, we watch things pass to preserve, to observe, we must amass. What flies, what swims, be it predator or prey, we seal them up so they never fade. This is what the Collector's book says, and then we also have a part of it which the Collector crossed out, the thing which most likely got him exiled from the Archivist from going against this role. The book says, but should they meddle in our affairs, we'll clean the planet and scorch their heirs, but the Collector just says,
okay, but playing is more fun, so I'm gonna make friends instead, the others stink.
The Collector only was taught that you need to collect others, but unlike the Archivists, he wants to make friends and play. So instead of just locking people up, like what the Archivists say they should do, he turns them into puppets. So he can play with them, and he can have friends, even though, as we all know, forcing people to play with you does not make them friends, and it isn't the case at all. All the Collector wanted is to have one friend, have people he can play games with. Bellows betrayed him, King betrayed him, and of course when Bellows comes and preys on his insecurity, like Bellows always does, the Collector would inevitably fall because he is just a kid who wants to play and just everyone's rejecting him and using him. While none of the scenes with the Collector are anything super emotionally provocative, they do lead to such interesting thoughts and ideas to be explored, which we will do in some of the next sections. All of these scenes, though, are super important, and I wish were fleshed out a bit more for how important they really are, so we can understand more about how the relationship of these two all-powerful beings has evolved over the course of the few months Luz is gone, what Lecter has gone through, what King has gone through, and just how they've changed because they don't have a normal relationship, not a normal friendship, because of the circumstances. Something much more interesting than King and the Collector, though, are the survivor of the Collector's game, so to speak. The main ones we focus on are Ida, Lilith, and the Hexolios. With the Collector's game being such an interesting apocalypse setting, the world building on the life of the survivors was something super interesting to see, and something I think was executed really well. I liked seeing how Lilith was just trying to brew the potions to keep their curses at bay, and it's something you wouldn't think about a lot, but is really interesting to see because, of course, they're going to need it if there's no one who can sell them potions. And in theory, what the Hexolios, they're trying to rebuild society, and the difficulties of of children organizing society, again, in theory, very interesting. And I think the part of this episode, this one, is what really got the short end of the stick, and that's so sad to see. The best part of Thanks to Them is seeing how the characters in the human realm reacted to missing their loved ones, and we don't see much of it in this episode from the demon realm characters, which is what I really wanted out of the episode. We see just the tiniest bit of the reaction of Ida, Lilith, and King, just saying that they're happy Lucy's safe. But with how interesting the situation is, I'm really mad that we didn't get more examples to explore these feelings more and see how the characters really are feeling and how they react. For example, the Lilith and Hootie reunion scene. It is such a well-executed scene, and I want more of that in this episode. It is a roller coaster of emotion where, on the one hand, they've reunited, but Hootie is unable to express himself until we learn that puppets are still conscious. And learning that the puppets are still conscious gives us so much more to think about. It means when Ida goes out with the Coven Heads, Rain is present and know how much Ida cares. It gives us so much more to think about, and is such an interesting concept I really wish we saw explored more, because it can mean so many things. But it is really the Hexolios which just get no love at all in this episode. While I find Basha's obsession with Amity super weird, if it was developed more where Basha felt lonely and reflected on what she did wrong, we could have got such an interesting dynamic. Or what about Amity's siblings? One parent is just evil, the other is lost, as is her sister. I don't need this to be the focus of the episode, but just 1-minute scenes here and there before the human characters come back could show us so much more about these characters, their points of view, and strengthen the reunion value and the value of the relationship of the characters. That being said, what we did get is something very interesting as well. I can't overstate how cool of a concept it is of the Collector and his puppets. It is something I would have never imagined, but provides for such good tension, and that can't be overstated. The survivors are barely holding on, and I just wish the stakes were a bit higher. Like in Watching and Dreaming, Lou's friends gets turned into puppets off screen, and I just wish that maybe we saw during the current hardships of living under the Collector how the stars actually patrol instead of just showing up when characters are safe. We could have had the sacrifice of the teachers and Bosch's teammates, so just giving us one more sacrifice of a main character during the final battle of the episode, it would have been nice because consequences. Overall, though, these survivors are the most interesting element of the episode and really just deserved more time to shine so that we could really understand the struggles more than just on the surface level. The main focus of For the Future is on the teenage protagonist with Luz, Amity, Gus, Willow, Hunter being joined by Camilla. While I think they steal screen time from the other characters, we get a lot of really interesting development with these characters in this episode, which builds off really greatly what we saw in Thanks to Them. This episode does a great job of preparing everyone's character arc for it to come to a close, and it does it for a lot of them since they'll get sidelined in the next episode. It is all very important stuff, I just don't think it should be in this episode. I think the most interesting part of Thanks to Them and For the Future is Camilla. Camilla was just such an average character when we saw her at the start of this show, but with so little screen time just in Yesterday's Lie and the Season 3, she's become one of the most complex characters in the show. Camilla acts as a mother figure to all our protagonists, which is really nice to see. All of them are missing their parents, so to have this adult figure who cares about everyone equally is so nice to see. I know I said we get too much of these already, but I would have liked to see a conversation with Amity and Camilla. Amity has such a toxic relationship with her mother, so to have Camilla act as a mother, that could have been a really interesting conversation, which I just want to see. And one interaction which I just love. It was great. Camilla and Willow. Camilla, with her maternal instincts, immediately realizes that something is wrong with Willow in this episode, that she is pretending to be fine when she really isn't. While the conversation doesn't last long, it just shows how good of a mother Camilla is and how much she cares about these teens that she has welcomed into her life, as well as serving Willow's character. But the best interaction with Camilla by far is Luz and Camilla. Thanks to them, perfectly set up how isolated Luz really feels, even though she's the one distancing herself from everyone, and Camilla did find this out, and is trying everything to make Luz do what makes her happy, even if that contrasts with what Camilla wants, like we saw in yesterday's live. So, at the end of For the Future, when Camilla finally confronts Luz, it is such a great scene. We kind of knew from the previous episode, which I covered in my Thanks to Them video, Camilla was a geek, and that's how she met Manny. In the scene, Luz learns her mother was a geek, but not about her father. There's a scrapped sequence from this episode which would have gone right here in between a few lines of dialogue, where it is confirmed that Camilla met Manny through her fandom. And again, I wish this did get expanded and it was just included in the episode, because it's just such an interesting thing, and I love that relationship of fandom and finding friends and family and love, because that's super interesting to explore, and I wish we saw more of that, and it parallels Luz's relationship with one of her mother. But even without this revelation, the connection to Lumity, this scene is just so powerful, because the fact that Luz didn't know her mother was a geek beforehand shows how shy Camilla was of fandom, and on the other hand, how proud she would be of Luz for expressing herself and finding her partner through that expression of herself in the fandom. And it just makes Camilla's relationship so much stronger, because Luz is stronger than her, and now Luz is trying to get rid of that part of herself because Camilla was forcing it down in the past. And it's just, it's so powerful. It really is. The real icing on the cake is when Luz in the scene finally realized what she wants. Luz's talisman has been built up since early season 2, with Luz just not knowing what she wants with her life. So this breakthrough of a scene is so well deserved and so well built up to. It is absolutely gorgeous, where the visuals surface the emotions and makes this simple character revelation feel like a world-shattering event, which, since this is a fantasy show, it really should feel like, and it's just handled so absolutely well. And the joy of Luz discovering String Bean as well. Awesome. Luz with a staff is chaotic, as we see, but it fills my heart with joy, and Luz's arc is almost complete, and it is so satisfying to watch here. And just seeing Luz with the staff both in this episode and the next one, it's so nice, even if we see String Bean for so little time. But to return to some of the other characters, let's take another look at Willow's arc in this episode. Throughout the show, Willow has struggled so much, but in season 2, seemingly, Willow has put all that behind her, and she seems to be this strong, fearless character. But in this episode, we find out that is far from the case. In season 2, every one of the teens is just going through so much trauma and struggling and pain. And what seems to have happened is that Willow assumed the role of the leader to make sure everyone is okay and keep the group happy and together, while really sacrificing her own inner peace as a consequence. Though we see the consequence of all that pain boiling up inside Willow, where it just all explodes out of her in this episode. In Labyrinth Runners, for example, Gus has so much emotion building up inside of him, and we see a similar breakdown where his magic overpowers his own will, and a similar thing happens to Willow in this episode. The difference is that for Gus, someone who is super outgoing and wants to be friends with everyone, he has this sort of panic attack, while for Willow, the base of the friend group, she goes through this sort of perilous state where she just becomes helpless. I love how, one, it's these magic attacks, they're super cool, but they also represent the character and how they react to it. It's such a cool concept, and I wish we got to explore it more. Give one for Amity. We kind of see one for Hunter in this episode, but it's just really interesting to see. It's executed in such a good way and really makes me care for Willow in a way I hadn't before. She was fine before, but this really made me understand the character. And while I liked the confident Willow, it kind of removed her struggle, and this episode made, which would have seemed like bad writing before, worth it. And all this struggle leads to another character, Hunter. Hunter, who in the previous episode was dealing with an unclear sense of identity, here he's helping Willow reassure herself of hers and thanking Willow for helping him discover his own. And of course, at the end of the episode, they both show that they like each other in a romantic way and hold hands, and it was such a sweet scene for both of them to sort of wrap up their character arcs where they completed each other, and it was so nice to see. Both Gus and Amity have small moments in this episode, but they exist mostly for support and don't get much of their own stories explored. It's a bit of a shame, though that would just steal time from others, so I completely understand it. Wherefore the future shines brightest is with developing the internal conflicts of our characters. With the longer runtimes of Season 3 and the plot feeling more focused than ever, and since all the episodes are connected where one leads right into the other, it allows us to stretch the character development out, not in a way where it feels forced, but more natural, perfectly weighted with the hidden trauma of the human realm characters, and we just see it perfectly. Before we reach the only part of 4 in the future, and Season 3, which is actually bad. Like I mentioned earlier, in theory, everything that happened at Techside was good. But there was one element which just ruined it for me, and her name is Kikimora. I really have no clue why Kikimora was the main villain of the Owl House's penultimate episode, because it's really just a detractor of the episode, wasting time, ruining characters, and there's no upside. I actually like the idea of Basha becoming the leader of Hexside, even if she is more of a conservative leader. Throughout the show, she's just been a bully with no redeeming qualities at all. So, in the wake of losing her friends, seeing how she might go from antagonizing people to doing everything she can to keep them safe, it could have been really fun to explore. But instead, it is convoluted power play by Kikimora, so she could gain power by making the last people alive susceptible to an attack, and starving? I would be fine. If Basha was in charge, she wouldn't help the human realm characters go to the archive because it would put the people she's protecting in danger. That would make sense. And it would work as a nice arc for her where she goes from just being reckless and sacrificing people to caring about people, even if it goes against the views of our main characters. She could also give Bosch an arc with Amity where the two old friends turn enemies, reunite, and things are awkward, but they're both happy for each other, seeing as that they've become better people, and have Basha kind of make up for being homophobic in any sport in a storm. There is no reason that Kikimora should be denying Bartholomew's ideas besides to consolidate power, but you are going to lose power if your government is incompetent, as the people will revolt. I really don't understand Kikimora's plan or why she wants to be emperor of high schoolers. It just doesn't make sense, and it's unclear why Basha would want to team up with Kikimora. I mentioned that we didn't have enough time for other arcs, and it was because of this pointless conflict which hogged half the episode without giving us anything of substance. It just makes me groan when I think about it. And it is worse because of all the Owl House villains that could have helped take over. Kikimora is the most annoying one by far. Think about how Terra's Snapdragon running the school could have given us some really interesting development. Really, any villain would have been better besides maybe Tibbles. If the plot was necessary to add conflict to the episode, I actually really do like the idea of Terra being in Kiki's place, because with Them's the Breaks Kid, we see how mean Terra is to children, how much of a dictator she is, and to have Luz finish the battle that Eden Rain started in overthrowing Terra, it would have been super cool, super nice, and just come full circle. And with the story thread, I'm not mad. I'm furious. There was absolutely no need. We had so little time, and Kikimora took it up. I want to hurt that little purple goblin. Her. Fuck part of the episode. I hate it. I hate it. I hate it. No. I'm serious though. I really disliked it. There's no. The last part of this episode worth discussing is how all the broken characters have sort of found their own peace, even if they're not at peace yet. While this episode has its bad parts, Kikimora, it did so much work with so many characters. Even if it wasn't enough for everyone, I have to admit, what they did here is really good when it comes to characters. While there's still so much struggle to come in watching and dreaming, almost every character has a resting period where they can reflect on everything that happened, and I think it leads to such a great transition between this episode and the finale. We got to see a full redemption for Maternal. He's friends with Gus before, he has earned a leadership role he's craved for so long here, and got to lead people into battle. It's so satisfying to watch that. In similar cases with Basha, even though it's not perfect, where after being rejected by Amity, it let her move on from being petty and also go and fight. King is finally moved past fearing the Collector and really onto wanting to help him. And this leads to Ida realizing the positive impact she had on both Luz and King. Lilith gets reunited with her best friend Hootie. Hootie couldn't move, he could barely talk, but they were together, and that scene made me cry. Every time it makes me cry. Like we mentioned, Luz has finally discovered what she wants and now can become closer with the people she loves, and has finally felt understood by her mother, one of her biggest barriers throughout the show. It's literally her greatest fear of not being understood, being rejected by her mother. Camilla feels free to be a geek, where she's making references to a book series with Gus and Hunter, which just makes me smile so much while watching. Willow comes to peace, and Hunter has found people who love him, and they come together. Even the Collector thinks he finds what he wants. Luz is back, and if he can stop her, he can play with King forever and be happy. Of course, that isn't the case, but he thinks he has found closure and people who love him. No matter the flaws for the future, there's no doubt that the ending is just about perfect of the episode. It sets everyone up for the end of this story, puts the pieces on board, and even ends the arcs for some of them. It is such a satisfying way to end a very mixed episode. For the Future is a very mixed episode. It comes between two nearly perfect episodes and is tasked with trying to bridge what is a very big gap while also having to be a narrative of its own. Where this episode really shines is developing the characters and giving them more depth than ever, really pushing the boundaries of how developed a Disney Channel character can be, especially in such little time they had, and making them feel real. But where the biggest struggle lies is making this episode its own thing. It feels like a middle piece, and that's something you don't really get while watching any other episodes of the season, or really any piece of the Owl House. And I really feel this episode did work, and would work so much better if it was split into 2 episodes, and it not being that led to its downfall. If you had an episode focusing on what everyone in the Boiler Isles did while Luz and friends were in the human realm, you got a second episode on the setting the board for the finale, Season 3 would have just been perfect. Perfect, 10 out of 10, and none of the flaws I stated would have been present. But, of course, this was all out of the hands of the writers, who only got 3 episodes, and for the most part, Kikimora did the best with what they had, and made an episode with good moments, but just feels a bit wasted due to its place in the overall story. And I quickly want to mention, everyone did a absolutely amazing job on the episode. The voice acting is better than anywhere else, the backgrounds feel so lived in, the colors are gorgeous, the writing is beautiful. While I have my problems with the episode, it is still a treat to watch, and has such a nice way to prepare for the ending of one of the best cartoons of all time. But to be honest, there is no topping thanks to them. And if you want to see why that is, the elements that make the episode just about perfect, I made a video a few months ago breaking it down. I highly recommend it.